Hello, everyone, and welcome to our grants information session for Rhode Island Council for the Humanities. We're so happy that you're here. We're excited to share our program with you and to, talk through what we do here at the council and hopefully inspire you to think about how you can be part of it. So I am Julia Renaud. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Associate Director of Strategic Initiatives and at the Humanities Council, of course. And I'll let Melissa introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Wong. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the grant making program coordinator. And we're so glad you are joining us today.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. We'll show this slide again, but here is all of our contact information. And if you have any one takeaway, let it be that you're welcome to reach out to us at any point about grants when you're thinking about your project and you don't know if it will be suitable for one of our grants as a grantee at all times. So my email address is juliarenaud@rihumanities.org. Melissa is at melissa@rihumanities.org. And then you can reach us both at grants@rihumanities.org. Okay, so in terms of what we are doing today, our goals are to give an introduction to the council so you become more familiar with our mission and our funding priorities, to give an overview of our grant opportunities, our guidelines, and our processes. We want to provide you with further resources. So I'll just add a note here that, yes, we are going to cover as much as we can today, but also know that there are a lot of little details to our grant program that we won't cover. So yes, really do encourage you to check out those resources following this session if you're interested in going forward with an application with us. And we'll talk about an overview of the application review process, give some tips for preparing your application, and then of course answer your questions. And just so you know, the Q&A portion of the session will not be recorded. Okay, so grant making at the Humanities Council. Well, the first thing I wanted to talk about is who we are, because that's important to know about if you're thinking about working with us as a potential grantee. So we were established in 1973, so almost 50 years ago. And our original mission was to inspire and support intellectual curiosity in all Rhode Islanders. And overall, that's still what we strive to do. Our mission has been updated since then. So the current one, which I like to look at in the context of our grant making, is that the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities seeds, supports, and strengthens public history, cultural heritage, civic education, and community engagement by and for all Rhode Islanders. And I think it's important to talk about that because it really is kind of a blueprint for our grant making program. So the way that we think about what we're doing is that we're seeding, supporting, and strengthening what already exists here in Rhode Island. We know that the humanities and the public humanities are taking place all over the state every day, and we see our role as providing resources and support for that. In terms of what we think of when we talk about the humanities, we'll get more into this later, but this is kind of an easy way to describe what we're talking about. So public history, cultural heritage, civic education, and community engagement. Those are all types of things that we fund. And who is our program for? It is by and for all Rhode Islanders. And obviously that is an aspirational mission. It is a mission that we work to fulfill more every day. And I think it just really emphasizes that we see ourselves as a resource for everyone in the state. So in terms of that, we are the only dedicated source of funding for public humanities in Rhode Island. And we're proud to support organizations like museums, libraries, historic sites, schools, preservation and historical societies, community and cultural organizations. And as you'll see a bit later on, we also support individual researchers and documentary, film, and media makers. So we work with pretty much everyone who is looking to bring Rhode Island stories to life and to amplify the state's many diverse voices. So this is gonna be focused on our grant making, but we do other things. We have partnerships, strategic initiatives, and really encourage you to check out our website to learn more about those. So in terms of our funding sources, that's kind of a good place to dive into who we are a bit more. So in 1965, the National Endowment for the Humanities was founded as a federal agency, and actually Rhode Island's own Senator Claiborne Pell was instrumental in the founding of the National Endowment for the Humanities, which we call the NEH. So about in the 10 years following the establishment of that federal agency, independent humanities councils were founded ultimately in every state and jurisdictional territory of the United States. So we are Rhode Island's independent state affiliate for the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we receive funding from the NEH every year. And that federal funding is what we use for our grant making. So you're going to see a lot of little particulars in our grant making process, and a number of those have to do with the fact that this is federal taxpayer money, right? And also we're, just so you know, we're one of 56 of these organizations throughout the states and jurisdictions of the United States. And so we have a lot of sister organizations all over the country and the world. So if you come across Humanities New York, Humanities Montana, et cetera, those are organizations that have analogous missions to ours. So we are our own private nonprofit. And we also receive funding, given that we also receive funding from private donors, we apply for our own grants, et cetera. But again, for our regular grant making program, the funding is federal. So in terms of our grant making programs for FY22, and when I say FY22, I mean the fiscal year 2022. So we define that November 2021 to October 2022. So in terms of the grant making programs that are open for this upcoming fiscal year, we're going to have our kind of standard project grant program. So some of you might be familiar with a few emergency relief funding grant opportunities that we had due to the coronavirus pandemic. So Congress in 2020 released CARES Act funding to the council through the NEH, and we had several rounds of CARES Act general operating support grants as well as project grants. We also just underwent or did a big program in together with Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. That was for general operating support with funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. And so if, you know, Congress decides to release more funds to us for this emergency relief support, we will be happy to administer them. However, at this point, what is on the docket, what we know for sure for FY 2022 is our project grant program. And so kind of going along with that, wanted to share with you what our major and mini grants budget is, and the major and mini grants are our project grants. And so the total allocated for that this year is $170,000. And that's pretty much in line with what we've had in our budget for it the last few years. And that roughly translates to about 15 major grants and about 15 mini grants. So, you know, I've talked a bit about the humanities, the public humanities, and sometimes people are a little bit confused about what those terms mean, completely understandable. So I wanted to unpack that a bit more. So in terms of what the humanities are, when they created the NEH, Congress defined the humanities as a set of academic disciplines which study the human condition. And so that includes literature, history, languages, ethics, philosophy, religion, and so forth. We also at the council have another definition we like to work with, which is that the humanities are the stories and ideas that help us understand our lives and our world. They offer us the opportunity to learn from our past, explore the present, and shape the future. They're about culture, community, and connections. And the humanities emphasize the exchange of ideas, critical and imaginative thinking, and the pursuit of wisdom. So in thinking about that as the framework for the humanities, so what are we talking about with the public humanities? Well, we think about the public humanities as the many ways that practitioners and scholars and culture bearers connect that humanities deep knowledge and expertise and all those practices with different audiences and communities. So how might you do that? Well, that's where public humanities projects come in, right? So you could think about, and they are vast. So you could think about an exhibition as a public humanities project, an oral history project, a panel discussion and community discussion, a community storytelling project, a walking tour. These are all, you can obviously do many different kinds of digital public humanities projects. And obviously that's all more popular during the pandemic, since that's a lot of times the only thing we're able to do safely. So really be imaginative with the shape that your project takes. But it really, the core is, what is have connecting with communities and audiences around the humanities. And the council believes that this all matters because cultural participation through the humanities contributes to greater connections between people, deeper understanding of the past and why it matters, and enhances the quality of the places that we live, work, and explore. And we believe these factors are essential for civic health, economic development, and a stronger democracy. Melissa, was there anything you wanted to add on those points?
I'm pretty sure you touched on this earlier, but since you brought up RI Charge, if you are watching this recording and you did receive an RI Charge grant, you're still eligible for one of our project grants.
Yes, correct. So your RI, if you have an RI Charge grant open, if you have a CARES Act grant open, those do not affect your eligibility for a major or mini grant program. And we'll get a bit more into those details, but yes, correct. Thank you. Okay, so to talk a little bit more about major or mini grants and what these grants are. So you'll see our major grants, they're for more money than our mini grants because that's what major means versus mini, right? So the major grant request is for $2,000 to $12,000. And what are we funding with major grants? We're funding public projects, and we just talked a bit about what that means. But that's the majority of requests that the council gets is for different kinds of public projects. We also fund documentary, film, and media projects. And so those projects, they need to have kind of strong humanities content and scholarship as part of them. And I do want to note that we have kind of a particular sequence for documentary, film, and media grants because we know that those projects take multiple years. So for specific information on that, I encourage you to take a look at our grant guidelines. So for major grants, the requests are for up to $5,000 for the research, planning, and development stages, and then requests up to $12,000 for production and implementation stages. And I'll say now that for our major grants and our mini grants, all grant-funded projects must be free, open, and accessible to the public. And so that, again, goes back to the fact that this is federal taxpayer money. And so given that it's federal funding, we want everybody to be able to access and experience your wonderful project or film or whatever you're doing. So in terms of mini grants, those are for requests up to $2,000. And similar to major grants, we have public projects available. We have documentary, film, and media grants available. We also have a third category for mini grants, and those are for individual researchers. So to clarify a bit more, only eligible organizations can apply for major grants. And we'll talk about eligibility in a minute. And only eligible organizations can apply for public projects and documentary, film, and media mini grants as well. So the individual researcher grant is the only grant that an individual can apply for on their own. And so those are grants that are really meant to support, as is in the name, research. So we think of those research projects as projects that individuals or a small group of people might develop to research a kind of a humanities topic or idea. So these projects, they can range from, really taking a deep dive into the history and culture of jazz in the early 20th century, or, we had somebody who was really interested in a particular historical event that took place in Newport in 1919 and really wanted to take a deep dive into that. And so, often it's for these sorts of specific research projects that people don't have the time or the resources to pursue on their own. So individual research projects do have to have as their outcome, as part of it, a public presentation of whatever their findings are. So that could be a blog post, it could be a talk, whatever it is. But just because, again, we want to connect all communities and audiences in Rhode Island with the humanities, it's sharing your research out to that wider audience. In terms of kind of when all this happens, so we have grant cycles happening throughout the year. The major grant cycle timeline is an annual one. So there's only one cycle per year, and it actually starts very soon on October 1st. So October 1st is when the letter of intent form becomes available on our grant making portal. And just to clarify, when we say letter of intent, we're not asking that you actually send us a letter. I completely understand why folks might do that. It's right there in the name. However, in this particular case, we are talking about a specific form that you find on our grant making portal. And also to confirm, every application that you will fill out and submit needs to be done through our grant making portal. We don't accept anything any other way. And so we're going to go over a bit later how to find that. But FYI. So if your organization is interested in applying for a major grant, you'll need to fill out the letter of intent form by November 1st. And that form is not binding. You can, if you're not sure whether or not your organization wants to apply for a major grant, I would just go ahead and do it because it gives you the option later. You're not able to apply for a major grant unless you fill out the letter of intent. And also, to further clarify, what we're really assessing in the letter of intent form is your eligibility to apply for the grant. So that's the screen there. And so really the vast majority, 99% of folks make it to the application stage. It's really just so we make sure you're not going through the trouble of filling out an application when the organization or the project isn't eligible. So you fill out the letter of intent by November 1st. If you'd like feedback on your application draft, you can fill out an application draft in the portal and just press save and then let us know that you'd like that feedback. You need to do that by December 1st, and we'll get you feedback by December 20th or so. And then by January 17th, that's when your application is due. And we take about 2 months to review those applications, and then mid-March is when the notifications will come out. So the mini grant cycle timeline is a little bit quicker. It's a little bit less involved. So we have quarterly deadlines. So for a year, there's one on November 1st, one on February 1st, one on May 2nd, and one on August 1st. And you might ask, why May 2nd when everything else is the 1st? It's because if the 1st falls on a weekend or a holiday, we make the deadline the next business day. So also that's why it's January 17th for the major grant deadline, because the 15th is a Saturday and May 1st is a Sunday. Okay, so, and we also offer feedback on application drafts for mini grants. So if you'd like that support, we're happy to give it. You just need to have your draft, as far along as you can get it in the portal before 2 weeks before the deadline, at least, and then send us an email and ask us to review it. And then once you submit your application, the notifications will come out about 6 weeks following the deadline. I guess I'll pause here. Melissa, were there any questions or things you wanted to add?
I think I'm good right now. I think you're covering it all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think I mentioned eligibility a bit, but I wanted to get a little bit further into it. So the kind of one major element of eligibility is your current grant status with the council. So you can only have one major or mini grant open at a time, and your organization must be in good standing with the council. And basically your organization would only not be in good standing if you had had a grant terminated with us previously. And if that had happened at your organization, you would know. So don't worry about that. If you're a first-time applicant or you've never had that happen, great. Okay, so and the question that we touched on a bit before, what about if you have another type of grant open with the council, like an RA Charge grant, a CARES Act grant? That is totally fine. So that does not impact your eligibility for a major or mini grant. Only other major and mini grants impact each other's eligibility. And I will also mention that you would if your organization has a mini grant open that will wrap up before the January 17th deadline, you're okay to submit a letter of intent. So by that, I mean, I think so there's about like 2.5 months between the letter of intent major grant deadline and the application major grant deadline. And if your organization is going to wrap up a currently open grant by then, you can submit a letter of intent. So if you have that situation, or if you're confused about what I'm saying, feel free to reach out. Okay, so I mentioned before about how organizations are the entities that are eligible for the public project grants and the documentary film and media grants. So eligible organizations must have 501c3 status or equivalent federal tax exempt status. If you're an individual researcher, again, you're only eligible for a research mini grant. If you're a person who has an idea for a public project and you would like to pursue funding for that, you would need to partner with a sponsoring nonprofit. And kind of to that point, the council does accept fiscal sponsorship. So meaning that if you are at an organization doesn't have federal tax exempt status, or you're an individual and you'd like to partner with an organization that does, you're welcome to do so. You should know that that organization, as the fiscal sponsor, will need to be involved in the project itself. And we can talk more about what that looks like. Municipal and state governments, including schools and libraries, can apply, as well as state, local, and federally recognized Indian tribal governments. Colleges and universities can apply, but only for programs that really reach beyond the campus community. So with that, we're talking about programs that or projects that have specific community partners and where the audiences are really going to be beyond the campus. And then if you're an out-of-state applicant, you can apply if it's for a project with a clear Rhode Island connection and clear Rhode Island impact. So, a lot of times we've had organizations that have branches all over the country, and they have a Rhode Island branch, and maybe their 501c3 incorporation is in another state, but they're really doing work in Rhode Island. So that's totally fine. It just has to be, the work itself needs to be focused on Rhode Island. Okay, so I wanted to talk through a little bit, say that you're eligible, say you're excited, say you have a project or a research topic. I wanted to let you know a bit about what you might expect from the grant application. And so for me, we'll talk through first the public project grants from the major and mini grant applications. So starting off with some basic information, which may not seem very basic if you don't know what a DUNS number is, which is what I will talk about right now. So a DUNS number is a number granted by the federal government. Again, it's required by the federal government. And again, because this is federal funding, the government wants to make sure that they want to track where their money is going, and they want to ensure that their money is going to an organization that legally can receive federal dollars. So, for example, isn't a foreign corporation. So your DUNS number is the number that the federal government uses to track that. You apply for it via Dun & Bradstreet, and you can get it in about 2 business days once you send in that application. So you can reach out to us if you need help with that. You can Google it. It's pretty straightforward once you fill out that application. So I mentioned that organizations must have federal tax exempt status. So we'll ask you for that 501c3 letter or whatever equivalent documentation there might be. We're also going to ask you about information of people on your team. So every project application requires a project director and an authorized official. And those 2 people need to be 2 different people. So the project director is really the person driving the project, really executing it on the ground. And then the authorizing official is the person who can kind of take legal and financial responsibility for the grant and for making sure that the project is executed as you say it will be and within all of the guidelines. So the authorizing official should be from the sponsoring organization and should have legal and fiscal authority in that organization. So in terms of project information, we'll also ask for your start and end date. That is up to you. You, as the person doing your project, know best, when it will start and when it will end. The one thing I'll note there is that the council doesn't fund anything retroactively. So meaning that, say, I have a big project I've been working on and I want to ask the council to fund a little piece of it, I would make sure that I didn't count anything that takes place before I got the grant towards the grant, just the little piece of it that I'm asking the council to fund. So for that reason, if you're applying for a major grant, you should say your start date is, I'd say no earlier than April 1st, because you'll hear back in mid-March. And for mini grants, I would say that it really should not start before the middle of the following month. So in terms of kind of what other things that we're asking for, we want to know really what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's kind of in some way, it's the core of the request. So that's really what synopsis, goals and outcomes, and outputs and activities are getting at. The synopsis is fairly self-explanatory. It's 2 to 3 sentences, ideally. Goals is really kind of the big picture of what you're hoping to do with your project. Outcomes are the specific things you're hoping to change with your project. And then outputs and activities really refers to how you're achieving those goals and those outcomes. So that's where the specifics of your project plan come in, like whether you're doing an exhibition or an oral history or whatever it may be. And we have grant guidelines on our website, which I really encourage you to look at, and our evaluation toolkit that have a lot more details about how we think about these different kinds of impacts that you're having and different ways to think about what you're doing. So for every project that we fund, we do require that there's humanities scholarship involved because we are the Humanities Council. And we do take an expansive view of what scholarship means. We don't just mean someone with an academic degree. It could be, you could have a professor or someone with a PhD on your team that's giving that insight. But we're also talking about lived experience, inherited cultural knowledge, and kind of deep community knowledge, right? So it could be a community elder. It could be someone who's actually lived whatever topic or experience you're exploring and adding their specific expertise and insight on that. So, feel free to please be expansive as well in how you're thinking about scholarship. We also want to think about civic relevancy. We would like you to think about how your project is impacting civic life in Rhode Island, because that is also kind of a critical part of how we think about the humanities as integral to civic life. Partners are important. So for all of our own projects, we have partners, we work with partners, and we really do believe in the importance of partnership in strengthening humanities projects and adding different perspectives and resources. So yeah, there's a section on there asking you about those connections that you have, and encourage you to take that as an opportunity to think, if you haven't already, about who else might get involved in your project that would benefit everyone. So kind of going along with that externally facing thought process, we'll ask you about a publicity and outreach plan. So thinking through, who are you trying to reach and how are you going to reach them concretely? So I think a lot of times people think that, and I've definitely thought this, that their project is for everyone. And totally, that could be true. And it is a wonderful goal. However, you're likely to be more successful in connecting with audiences if you do target a bit more, who you're trying to connect with and how. And also, if you're working with K through 12 students as an integral part of your project, we're going to ask about the curricular alignment of your project with whatever else they're doing in their studies. So keep an eye out for that. So we also have a project budget section, which should not be surprising given that ultimately it is a grant application, right? Money. So we will ask you what your total request to the council is. So how much are you asking the council for? We'll also ask you about a total cost share. And so that goes along with this bullet point that talks about this matching requirement 1-to-1. So what that means is that, again, because it's federal money, for every dollar that you request from the council, you need to have at least a $1 from another source. So that means if you're requesting $2,000 from the council, you need to have at least a $4,000 budget. And that other half needs to be coming from other places. Now we accept cash towards that cost share. So, that could be money from you personally, it could be money from your organization, it could be money from a grant, from another donor, wherever it's coming from, totally fine. But that's what we mean when we say cash. And then in terms of another source for the cost share funds, we also accept in-kind donations as counting towards the cost share. So if you have volunteers working on your project, you could estimate that maybe their labor is worth $25 an hour. So if somebody volunteers for you at 4 hours, that's $100 towards the cost share, for example. Or say someone's letting you use their space. Well, how much would it cost to rent it? That can be counted towards the cost share. So, we can get into that more if you have more questions, but that's what that's talking about. I did want to mention that we've had a recent policy change to align with the federal government's policies around our indirect cost rate. And I'm not going to get too deep into this because it's pretty technical, but I will say an indirect cost is basically a cost that goes towards your project, but isn't a specific line item in the project. So say you're at an organization and as part of the project, you're using your office's copier and the administrative coordinator at your office is helping you schedule meetings for the project, is, facilitating the spaces, whatever it may be. So those we would think of as indirect costs. They're costs that are incurred as part of the project, but they're kind of the overhead, right? So in terms of how much you can charge towards your grant of that, that's what the indirect cost rate is about. And so you'll know if your organization has negotiated that rate with the federal government, we'll honor it, and otherwise it's 10%. And we have more information about that in our grant guidelines and in the application. Let us know if you have any questions. So I did want to mention that we do require a budget in our template. You can find that on our website. Let me know if you have any questions. And also to keep an eye on allowable and unallowable expenses. So again, because it's federal funding, there are things we can fund and things we can't fund. And there's a list of all that in our grant guidelines. We can't fund food and alcohol, for example. We can't fund projects that are really geared towards advocacy and lobbying for a specific public policy, for example. So definitely take a close look at that and be in touch if you have any questions. So we'll also ask you about your project evaluation plan. So when we think about evaluation, it's not as complex as you might think. I mean, the core of evaluation is really saying, what do you want to learn from your project? You kind of as a person doing it. So, say, I don't know, I want to learn who's actually coming to my event. How can I ascertain that? And how can I then kind of think through that information. So that's what we're talking about with evaluation. And so we have some great resources, and I really encourage you to look into them. So we have the evaluation toolkit, and we also have an evaluation workshop video on our website. So please do check those out. And then finally, there's additional documents. They're optional. That's if you have, like, you want to give us your resume or a letter of support or something like that. So up to you. I know that was a lot, and that was kind of the biggest string of information about that particular application. I did want to, and that application is kind of the blueprint for our other ones, but there are some changes that I just wanted to mention. So if you're applying for an individual research mini grant, you're not going to have to worry about a DUNS number. You're not going to have to worry about an authorized official. We don't ask for tax exempt status documentation. You do not have to do the one-to-one cost share match, although any cost share you have, please let us know. We appreciate it. And then you won't have to deal with an indirect cost rate. And all of that is because you're not an organization, and it doesn't make any sense to ask those things of you because of course you're not a 501c3. Okay. We're also going to ask you, because of the nature of the project, about copyright, about your research topic, your research plan, your research qualifications, and your research bibliography. So keep an eye out for that. And then I mentioned this before a bit, but for the major grant letter of intent form, it's a lot briefer than the application. It's, again, really just to help us get a sense of you and your project and whether or not you'd be eligible. So we're going to ask you about the name of the organization, your name as the applicant, the name of the project, the estimated project start and end date. That's a typo, but it should say start and end date. Ask you about your project format. So, if you're doing a documentary film, I keep saying exhibition, so why not an exhibition, a digital program, whatever it is. We'll also ask you about the phase of your project, if it's in development versus implementation. And then we'll also ask you about how much you're going to be requesting from the council, as well as for a brief project abstract, so a description of what you want to do. Again, none of this information is binding. We know it's all subject to change. And again, if you think your organization might want to apply for a major grant, I would just go ahead and do it. If you decide you don't after you file the letter of intent, that's totally fine. You just shoot us an email and say that you're not going to do it this time around. Will not be counted against you, completely fine. But yeah, I would just go ahead and do it. And I'll also mention that there's going to be PDFs of this letter of intent on our website as of October 1st, and there are PDFs of our mini grant applications on our website right now, so that you don't have to go into the portal to see what they look like. And then finally, in terms of the grant application, I wanted to flag a few things about the major grant documentary, film, and media application, since that's a little different. So it's similar to the public project application, except we'll ask you about your project medium and runtime, your aesthetic and stylistic approach, if you're committed to the free public screening in Rhode Island, because that's how we know that your project is, or your final output is going to connect with Rhode Islanders. We'll also ask you for a work sample, and we'll ask you for artistic and production staff bios. And with that, I will pause for a minute and check in. Melissa, any questions or things that you wanted to add?
This is a question that came up. If an organization is a first-time applicant, do you recommend beginning with a mini grant?
That is a great question. And I would say not necessarily. I would say that you, as a first-time applicant, definitely reach out to us, as a first step, and we can talk through the particulars. But generally, the difference between a major grant and a mini grant is more to do with the scale of the project and the needs of the project. There's a big difference between getting $2,000 of funding from the council with a $4,000 budget and getting $12,000 in a $24,000 budget, right? And so I think it's important that you just think through what would be best for your project. And we've certainly had first-time applicants receive major grants before. So I think it really just has to do with how suitable your project is for the opportunity and, what case you're presenting and what your project is. So yeah, but we would love to talk through that with you too. Right. Okay, so if you do receive a grant from the council, well, first of all, congratulations. We're excited to work with you and to be supporting your work. So I did want to mention a few things about what to expect if you do receive a grant from us. So because again, it's federal money, you can expect reporting on your grant. So, and that is required. So if your project timeline is over a year, we'll ask you to file an interim report. And if, regardless of the length of your project, we will ask you to file a final report. And so that more information on what's in that will be in your grant agreement, and you can also see it in our grant making portal. That's where you'll fill out the reports as well. Another thing to expect if you receive a grant from us are resources and support from us. We're happy to help get the word out about any events or products you create. We're happy to attend any events you have. So please let us know when they're happening. And yeah, we have a calendar, we have a newsletter, we have social media accounts, etc. And we love to help get the word out. We're also here to work with you through the process. So, there's no requirement in checking in with us by any means, but we hope that you can think of us as a resource. We do work with a lot of organizations across the state. Sometimes we have ideas about people to connect with. We're also happy to help you think through any issues that are coming up with your project, etc. So yeah, feel free to keep the conversation going because we love to talk to you. And kind of going along with that, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? So we know that things change and that things have to change often. And so we are happy to work with our grantees as these changes inevitably arise and adaptations are necessary. We've had to adapt our own internal projects many times. And, we're happy to talk through that with you if you need a timeline extension, if you need to change your in-person program to a virtual program, whatever it may be. Please just reach out and we can work through all that with you and are happy to do so. And honestly, at this point, we just expect it because we're all living in the same world. Okay, so hopefully this has inspired you to want to apply. I hope so. So in terms of how you can do that, again, the only way to apply is through our grant making portal. Again, also, we have PDFs of reference copies of our applications on our website, so you can take a look at them before you make an account or whatever it might, or decide to apply. But once you decide, you can visit our grant making page on our website, rihumanities.org. So you go to rihumanities.org, you click on this grants header, and then once you're on this page, you'll see on the left this apply for a major or mini grant. And you can just click on this button and it will take us right to the portal. And if you don't have an account yet, you can make one, super easy. And if you do, you'll log right in and then you'll be able to see kind of all of the applications, both active and historical, that you and your organization have submitted, along with the currently available opportunities to apply. And I did want to say, in answer to the question, are there any resources to help me? Yes, the answer is yes, yes, yes. So first of all, there are resources on the grant making page on our website. So back on that page that we just went through of how to get to. So again, there's PDFs of applications, there's grant guidelines. Please do look at those. Evaluation toolkit. There's going to be a video of this workshop, as well as an evaluation workshop video. And then also, Melissa and I are a resource, and it's literally our job to help you. And it's also what we like most to do. So please reach out, contact us well ahead of the deadline to talk through your project, especially if you're a first-time applicant or if you haven't applied in a few years. we particularly encourage you to reach out. And we've definitely found that applications are more successful when folks reach out to us ahead of time, because we are able, it's also our job to know the ins and outs of our program, and we're better able to address any questions, anticipate any issues that might come up with your application, and kind of talk through how to present your application in the strongest way possible. So please do reach out. You can email us at grants@rihumanities.org, and also call us at 401-273-2250, which is the council's main line. And again, we're happy to review application drafts and provide feedback. For major grants, again, that's the December 1st deadline, and for mini grants is at least 2 weeks prior. And Melissa, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
I just wanted to add that this is my favorite slide of the whole presentation. I think Julie and I both know that this is a lot of information to throw at people and to digest it like in a 1-hour session. So you don't need to go it alone. You can reach out to us anytime for any questions you have about applying or about managing your project. We are so happy to help.
Thank you, Melissa. And I agree. Okay, so in terms of just like things to think about and tips, in terms of considerations for your projects, this first one about timeline, make sure it's feasible. So that pretty much applies to everything in your application. Make sure it's feasible. I think a lot of times people, and I've definitely done this, think that the kind of more ambitious and wide-reaching the end product is, the more competitive the application will be. Not necessarily, because really reviewers want to see that whatever you say you're going to do, that you will be able to do. And so making sure your timeline is feasible is part of that, being realistic. In terms of project goals, which, and the goal is the top level target that you're striving to hit, that is a place to kind of dream big, so your overall vision, goal for the project, for sure, dream big there. Also, in terms of project outcomes, thinking through what you're hoping to change, thinking about civic outcomes as well. And then being specific with your deliverables and project outputs. How will you achieve your goals through those? And what is the scope of the project? So, being clear about, even if it is like a multi-phase, multi-year project, what part of the project will this specific grant focus on and fund? So in other words, what's the thing that once you've done it, you're like, okay, I did the grant project, set. Collaboration and partners. So we talked about this a little bit before, but are there other organizations trying to achieve similar goals, working on other topics, or similar topics, or maybe an organization that's coming at it from a different angle that will really enrich how you're thinking about it. So thinking through partners. And also similarly, thinking about audience, being as specific as you can about that audience, and thinking through who your project is serving. And then how will you connect with those folks? In terms of project execution, kind of back to this idea of feasibility, making sure that you do have that capacity, resources, and staffing to execute should the project be funded. And then also, how are you going to capture the impact of the project and your attendees in terms of documenting, which goes hand in hand in your evaluation, right? And thinking about what you've learned from the project, what worked well, and what would you do differently. And we are going to ask you about that as well in your reporting. So things to think about, particularly during the pandemic, is your responsiveness to the pandemic. Does your project acknowledge the new limitations and the possibilities of our current reality? Is it realistic and given all the public health guidelines we have? And are you engaging with questions and issues critical to our moment? So that's not a requirement for sure, but if you're engaging with something that does have contemporary resonance, how are you dealing with that? Does your project provide for the safety of all team members and participants? Very important. If your project has digital elements, are they current and well thought through? And do you have a firm grasp on or experience with the necessary technology? And even if it's not you, that's totally fine. It's just like, does someone on your team, if you're doing a podcast, has anyone on your team ever made a podcast before? Reviewers are going to want to know, and if someone just took an audio engineering class and they have the skills, that's awesome. But just making clear to reviewers that you can execute what you've set out to execute. And then creativity and adaptation. So how creatively are you responding to these limitations and possibilities? And if you thought of this project in December 2019, how have you adapted it to our current reality? Again, just a plug for the evaluation toolkit and the evaluation workshop videos. They're really great resources to kind of think through how the council thinks about evaluation, as well as, really great resources, I think, in terms of developing an evaluation plan, which is part of the application. So please do check those out on our website. Did also want to mention that give a little bit more information about our review process. So once you submitted that application, every proposal is carefully considered. Staff does not review proposals. So we serve as facilitators of the process. We organize materials for reviewers and provide them to them, but we do not serve as reviewers ourselves. So really our role is to help everything go as smoothly as possible. In terms of who is reviewing, it's a combination of board members and community reviewers. And we are careful to assemble as diverse and representative of review panels, and as we are able, that is a priority for us. And it's usually about half board members, half community reviewers. And those board members and reviewers are chosen for their expertise and their experience in the humanities, as well as for their kind of diverse qualities of, who they are, where they live, what kind of work they do, etc. So really looking to have our reviewers represent all Rhode Islanders in that sense, and also bring their own specific expertise to bear. So in terms of staff tips and observations, again, our role is to help you put your best application forward. We're not serving as reviewers. So here are just a few thoughts and tips that some of them seem intuitive, but are worth saying. So answer the questions in the application thoroughly and make sure you're following directions. So have you actually answered the question and provided everything that we're asking for? Do your project narrative, project budget, and project timeline all tell the same story? So that's what I was mentioning before. When I read the synopsis and then I look at the budget and then I look at the timeline, do all those pieces fit together? Or would I be really surprised to see what you're actually asking for money for after I've read that narrative? Be clear about the scope of your project. What will be accomplished by the project end date? Again, that idea of how will you know when you're done, right? And kind of being clear about what that is. And again, even if it's part of a bigger project, that's totally fine. You can talk about the bigger project, but be clear about what exactly the grant funding is for. Do you have any commitments from the partners you're listing? And if you're trying to really reach a particular audience, have you made concrete connections with that audience or partners that work with that audience? So really thinking, if you're putting organizations down in your partner section, ideally you've reached out to them and gotten their commitment to your project. And similarly, if you're trying to reach specific target audiences, do you have you made some of those connections already? Do you know those outreach methods? Do you know what'll be most effective? And letters of support can also be super helpful here. So if you're listing partners, definitely having them provide, even if it's just a paragraph, stating their commitment to the project and their support of you're doing it, that's very helpful. So overall, start early and reach out to staff with any questions. And hopefully you know how to do that at this point, but we will tell you again. So I know all of this is a lot. As Melissa said, it's a lot of information. And it is work between filling out the application and doing the reports if you get the grant and all of that. So we wanted to talk a bit about what you gain by receiving a grant from the council. So obviously financial support and a monetary reward. It's a grant. At the end of the day, it's money that you're getting, right? But it's also a chance to really codify your project ideas and goals to move beyond the idea phase. So to really kind of think through, as you're filling out the application, all these different parts of your grant project if you haven't had the chance already. Also, grants demonstrate community investment. So, the council is here supporting what you're doing beyond you or your organization. And that in turn can help you leverage additional support, resources, and funding. So we've definitely seen that because of our grant funding and grants from other funders, that makes you more likely to connect with other funders as well. And that in part is due to the PR opportunities that are afforded. So again, we try to help you get the word out best as we can, giving you that kind of public exposure. And finally, I'm someone myself who external accountability really helps me. And if you're the same, this will definitely provide that. So, you can think of the deadlines and the public product and the process as positive and holding you accountable to really realizing whatever you're hoping to realize. And again, just want to encourage you to contact us. You can reach out to me at juliarenault@rihumanities.org, melissa@rihumanities.org. Melissa, was there anything else you wanted to add?
I think you covered it all.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. And with that, we're just going to go ahead and say thank you so much. And we can't wait to be in touch with you, hear your questions right now, and also when you reach out to us. And we appreciate your taking the time to watch this video and learn more and come to this session and learn more about our program. Hope to be in touch soon. Thanks so much. Bye.